They say money can buy anything except peace. And one night, in a roadside diner, a billionaire learns exactly how much his silence cost. The rain had just started to fall when a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot of Ruby's Country Grill off Highway 98, just outside Mobile, Alabama. The place wasn't much to look at. A flickering red neon sign, an old jukebox inside that only half worked, and tables that had seen better days. But to the locals, Ruby's was a place where time slowed down. When Elliot Ramsey stepped through the door, heads turned. The man didn't look like he belonged there. He was tall, sharply dressed, the kind of man who wore silence like armor. His silver watch probably cost more than most people's cars in that parking lot. Still, he looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from travel, but the kind that settles in after years of pretending you're fine. He scanned the diner, adjusting his cufflinks before choosing a booth near the window. His driver waited outside. Elliot had a flight to catch in 2 hours, but his stomach told him to stop. "Just a quick bite," he muttered to himself. A woman's voice broke his thoughts. "Afternoon, sir. You eating in or taking it to go?" Elliot looked up. His waitress was Tasha Green, mid-30s, with calm eyes and a quiet confidence that didn't match the worn apron she wore. Her curly hair was pulled into a bun, and a small cross hung around her neck. She spoke politely, but not with the fake cheerfulness he was used to hearing from people who recognized his face. "In," he said simply, closing his phone and setting it on the table. "I'll have the ribeye. Medium rare, no sides." She tilted her head slightly, pen hovering over her notepad. "That's it? You sure you don't want nothing with it? Mashed potatoes, green beans, something to soak up the grease?" He smirked, the first hint of a human expression. "Just the steak. I'm not much for sides." She jotted it down and gave a polite nod before walking back toward the kitchen. For a moment, he watched her go. There was something about her walk. Slow, steady, almost deliberate, like she was thinking about something heavy. Elliot took a sip of water, checked his watch, and stared out at the rain tapping against the window. His life had been reduced to schedules and numbers, meetings, deals, acquisitions, headlines. He didn't remember the last time he sat somewhere without a boardroom around him. He sighed, trying to shake off the weight of it all. The last thing he needed was to think. A few minutes later, Tasha came back, setting a plate in front of him. The steak looked perfect, seared just right. She placed a folded napkin beside his water, then paused before stepping away. "You want steak sauce?" she asked. "No, if it's cooked right, I don't need it." She gave a small smile. "You sound like my daddy." "Smart man," Elliot replied, cutting into the steak. "Yeah," she said softly. "He was." There was something about the way she said was that made him look up, but she was already walking away, her shoulders slightly tense. Elliot pushed the thought aside and focused on his food. For a while, the only sound in the diner was the quiet clinking of his knife against the plate and the soft static of an old radio in the corner. When he was done, he dabbed the corners of his mouth with a napkin and waited for the check. He needed to get back on the road. He had investors to call, a deal to finalize, and no time for distractions. But as Tasha approached again, something about her demeanor had changed. Her eyes didn't meet his this time. She placed a small folded slip of paper on the table, not the check, just a note, and said quietly, "On the house today." Elliot frowned. "I don't take handouts." She didn't flinch. "It's not a handout." And before he could respond, she walked away. He stared at the paper for a long second, unsure whether to open it. Something about the way she said those words made the air in that tiny diner feel heavier. Finally, he unfolded it. There, written in small, neat handwriting, were just 6 words that made his chest tighten instantly. "You left before Mama died." For a second, his mind went blank. He blinked, staring at the words as if they might change, but they didn't. They were clear, deliberate, and personal. His breath caught. Nobody in this place could have known that story. Nobody. He looked up and saw Tasha watching him from across the counter, her expression unreadable. He didn't know who she was yet, but she clearly knew him. But something in her eyes told him this wasn't about money. It was about the past coming to collect. Elliot didn't move at first. The paper sat there on the table like it was alive, carrying something he'd buried decades ago. His hand stayed frozen above it, his fingers slightly trembling, even though his face didn't show it. The billionaire who had stared down senators, hostile takeovers, and courtroom reporters now staring down a folded piece of diner stationery. He took a breath and read it again. You left before Mama died. His throat tightened. His first thought was confusion. Maybe it was a prank or a coincidence. But deep down, a small part of him already knew that wasn't true. There was only one place, one family, one moment that line could have come from. He turned the note over, hoping for a name, a clue. Nothing, just a faint grease stain from where her thumb must have pressed against it. When he looked up, Tasha was at the register, refilling someone's coffee like nothing had happened. Her hands were steady, but her eyes gave her away. Every so often, they darted toward him just for a second, then back to the task. He folded the note carefully, slid it into his pocket, and called out, Miss, Tasha, right? She turned, her voice calm but firm. That's right. Could I get the check now, please? It's taken care of, she said again, still wiping the counter. I'd rather pay. I said it's taken care of. The two of them locked eyes, neither blinking. The clatter of dishes and chatter in the diner faded in his mind. It was just the two of them now, standing in the middle of something much bigger than a meal. Finally, Tasha broke the stare. You finished your steak? He nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time we talk. The way she said it wasn't an invitation. It was a demand. Elliot leaned back slightly, taken aback by her tone. I don't know what this is about, he said carefully, but you've clearly mistaken me for someone else. She gave a short, humorless laugh. You think I don't know your face? You think I don't remember? Elliot's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. You were younger then, she continued, stepping closer. You came to that house on Ridgeview Lane. You talked to my mother in the kitchen. You promised her something. Elliot's gaze dropped to the table. Ridgeview Lane. He hadn't heard that name in years, not since his early 20s, when he was still chasing investors, running on empty, trying to build his empire off other people's money and trust. He started, but Tasha cut him off. You told her she'd be fine, she said, voice steady but shaking underneath, that her job was safe, that your company just needed to restructure. He looked up slowly, his eyes searching hers. Green. Your last name is Green? She nodded once. Elliot swallowed hard. Your mother was Loretta Green. That's right. And suddenly the noise in the diner vanished again. The room spun slightly. He remembered Loretta, her warm laugh, her loyalty. She worked as a line supervisor at his company's first manufacturing plant in Baton Rouge. She had given 20 years of her life to it. And when things went south financially, Elliot had promised her she wouldn't be laid off. But the next week, she was, along with 40 others. He remembered the phone call, her begging, her voice cracking as she said, I've got a little girl, Miss Ramsey. Please. He'd hung up. He'd told himself it was just business. Now that little girl was standing in front of him. Elliot rubbed his temples. I didn't know she died 3 months later, Tasha said, cutting him off again. Heart gave out. Doctor said stress. I was 12. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Each word hit harder than the last. Elliot's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Tasha took a step back, folding her arms. You walked out of her life like it didn't mean a thing. And now you walk in here, order your steak, act like the world owes you quiet. Tell me, Mr. Ramsey, do you ever think about the people you stepped on to get where you are? He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. I didn't. No, she said, interrupting him again. You didn't mean to. That's what people like you always say. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The sound of a coffee pot dripping filled the silence. Elliot finally whispered, Why now? Why say something after all this time? Because I finally got tired of pretending I was okay, she said, and because you needed to know what your kind of success costs. Her words hung in the air, raw, heavy, unfiltered. But behind the anger in her voice, there was something else, something deeper, something he couldn't name yet, and it made him stay in that booth a little longer than he should have. For a moment, Elliot didn't know where to look. Every pair of eyes in that diner suddenly felt like they were on him, even though no one had actually turned their head. His palms were damp, and the note in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. Tasha stood by the counter, pretending to refill the sugar jar, but her hands moved slower now. Every so often she glanced back, not with bitterness, but something that looked almost restrained. Elliot finally pushed himself up from the booth and walked toward her. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Can we talk outside?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded toward the back door near the kitchen. 5 minutes. He walked out to the narrow alley behind the diner, where the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The smell of wet asphalt filled the air. A neon reflection flickered on the puddles near his shoes. When Tasha came out, she crossed her arms and leaned against the brick wall. "So, what is it you want to say, Mr. Ramsey?" He took a breath. "I don't know what kind of answer you expect from me. I was 23, trying to keep a company alive. I made choices that destroyed lives," she said sharply. He paused, then nodded slightly. "Maybe they did. But back then, I told myself if I didn't make those cuts, everyone would have lost their jobs. I was trying to save what I could." Tasha shook her head slowly. "You didn't save her." Her voice cracked on that word, and it hit him harder than any insult could have. Elliot looked down. "Loretta Green was one of the best people I ever worked with. I should have done more. I should have called her back." "You didn't," Tasha said flatly. "No," he admitted. "I didn't." The rain started up again, soft at first. They both stood there in silence for a while, the sound of cars rushing by on the highway nearby. Finally, Elliot spoke again. "Those 6 words in that note. How did you even know I'd be here?" "I didn't," she said, folding her arms tighter. "I didn't know you would. I just knew one day I'd see your face again. The news, the magazines, the interviews. I've seen your name for years. I recognized you the second you walked in. So you planned this?" "Planned it?" she scoffed. "You think I got time to plan anything? I work 2 jobs, raise a teenage boy, and barely sleep. I didn't plan a thing. But when you sat in that booth like you owned the place, yeah, I had something to say." Elliot let out a low breath, the kind that carried years of buried guilt. "You think saying it to me now changes anything?" Tasha looked him dead in the eye. "No, but it changes me." That stopped him cold. There was something raw in her tone, something honest, not performative. "I ain't asking for money," she continued. "I don't want a handout. I just needed you to see the face of someone who had to clean up the mess you left. Someone who had to grow up faster than she should have because a man with a fancy degree made a business decision." Elliot's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." "That's the problem," she said softly. "People like you never mean to." "But you sleep fine at night, don't you?" He didn't answer. She took a slow step closer, rain glistening on her face. "You want to know something? When I was a kid, I used to pray my mama's boss would see what he did and feel bad about it. I thought maybe that'd make it hurt less. But you never came back." Elliot swallowed hard. "I didn't think." "No," she interrupted again. "You didn't think. And that's why you're here. Maybe not to eat, maybe not by choice, but something put you in that booth today. Maybe God got tired of you hiding." The words cut through him like glass. For the first time, Elliot didn't have a defense, didn't have a speech ready. He just stood there, drenched, a man who'd finally run out of excuses. Tasha turned to walk back toward the door, but stopped halfway. "You ever lose someone and wish you could talk to them one last time?" she asked without looking back. Elliot hesitated. "Yes." "Then maybe you know how it feels," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She opened the door and stepped back inside, leaving him alone under the rain. He stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she'd been, replaying every word. But something deep inside him shifted. Because for the first time in years, Elliot Ramsey wasn't thinking about profits or power. He was thinking about regret. Elliot went back inside, but the diner felt different now. The smell of fried food and coffee seemed heavier, like the air itself was judging him. He sat back in the booth, his untouched water glass still sweating onto the table. Tasha was behind the counter again, scribbling something on an order pad, but her focus wasn't really on her work. When she noticed him watching her, she walked over slowly, her hands tucked in her apron. "You're still here," she said. "I'm not sure where else to go right now," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You really don't remember me, do you?" Elliot looked at her closely. Her face, her eyes, her voice. There was something familiar, but he couldn't place it. He shook his head. No, I remember your mother, but you were just a kid. Tasha nodded slowly. 12. I remember you showed up in a black suit with a box of donuts. Said you wanted to talk about the future. Mama thought that meant she was getting promoted. She made coffee and told me to go play outside, but I heard everything. He closed his eyes, a flash of memory hitting him. The little girl sitting on the front porch steps, humming to herself, holding a Barbie doll with one arm missing. That was her. You used to sit on the porch while your mom worked overtime, he said quietly. You'd wave when I left the factory. Her expression hardened. Yeah, I used to think you were a good man. You walk around with your nice suits and your private jets, she said, but I bet you still can't sleep through the night, can you? I bet you hear things sometimes, old voices, regrets you can't explain. Elliot exhaled slowly. You're right. The honesty in his voice surprised her for a second. He wasn't performing anymore. He was stripped bare. I worked my whole life to prove I wasn't like my father, he said quietly. He walked out when I was 9, left my mom with nothing. I swore I'd never be that man, but maybe I turned into something worse. Tasha's expression softened just slightly. You think admitting that fixes anything? No, he said, but maybe it's a start. She didn't reply right away. She just studied him. This man who once had all the power, now sitting small in a vinyl booth, looking like he'd finally stopped running. After a moment, she said, You ever go back to Baton Rouge? He shook his head. Not once. You should, she said. There's a small cemetery behind St. Mary's Church. My mom's buried there. Maybe you ought to go see her. He blinked, surprised. You'd want me to? She shrugged. Doesn't matter what I want. But maybe she deserves it. He nodded, barely able to speak. A bell dinged behind the counter. Someone's order ready. But neither of them moved. Tasha took a small step back, gripping the edge of the booth. I waited years for a chance to say what I said today. But hearing you admit you remember her, I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Elliot swallowed hard. Probably both. For a few seconds, they said nothing. Then Tasha pulled the folded note from his pocket, flattened it on the table, and looked at it one more time. I wrote those 6 words 3 years ago, she said softly. I never thought I'd get the chance to give them to you. He looked up at her, his voice barely above a whisper. Why now? She glanced toward the rain outside. Because my son asked me last week what forgiveness really means. And I didn't know how to answer him. Her eyes met his. Maybe this was my way of finding out. But even as she said it, Elliot could tell. This wasn't the end of the conversation. It was only the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Tasha stood there for a moment, the note still between them. Her fingers lingered on the paper, tracing the edge, before she folded it back up and slipped it into her apron pocket. Elliot didn't move. He just watched her, like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a waitress, not as the daughter of a name buried in some forgotten HR file, but as a living reminder of everything he tried to forget. Why did you keep that note for so long? He finally asked. She gave a small shrug. Because I didn't trust what I'd say if I ever saw you. I figured if I wrote it down, I wouldn't lose my nerve. He nodded slowly. Smart. Her lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. Yeah, well, I had to be. Mama used to say the world don't slow down for nobody. You either learn how to fight quiet, or you drown. Elliot leaned back, running a hand through his hair. She was right. She usually was, Tasha said softly. Except about people. She trusted too easy. She believed in promises. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. They both knew he was the reason her mother's trust turned into ashes. She slid into the booth across from him, folding her hands. Can I ask you something? No business talk, no fancy excuses, just the truth. He nodded slowly. Why her? Elliot's brow furrowed. What do you mean? When your company was going under, you could have fired anybody. You had a dozen supervisors, but you picked her. Why? He exhaled slowly, rubbing his thumb against his wedding ring, an old habit that came out whenever he was forced to confront something ugly. I didn't pick her personally, he said. We were losing millions. Investors wanted proof I could cut costs fast, so I told my managers to trim the payroll. I didn't even read the list. I just signed off. Tasha's stare hardened. So you didn't even know? He shook his head. Not until later. She leaned forward slightly. You know what that sounds like to someone like me? It sounds like you killed a part of my life and didn't even look at the body. Elliot swallowed hard, looking away. The comparison wasn't wrong. Tasha continued, her voice trembling with restrained anger. You know what it's like watching your mother come home with that look in her eyes, that empty stare that says she's trying to be strong but she's already broken. You know what it's like to hear her cry through the walls and there's nothing you can do but pretend to sleep? He didn't answer. His throat felt tight. My mom worked herself sick for that company, she said. She believed loyalty meant something. She used to tell me you were a good man, that you'd remember her hard work when things got better. Tasha let out a shaky breath. But things didn't get better for her. You got rich. We got bills. She got tired and one night she just stopped breathing. Her eyes were glistening now, but she didn't wipe them. She wasn't looking for pity. Elliot's voice broke slightly when he spoke. I'm sorry. Tasha let out a quiet laugh. You know, people always say that when they don't know what else to say. But I don't think you're lying. You look like a man who's been sorry for a long time, just not for the right reasons. That hit him harder than anything she'd said so far. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. There were no words good enough to defend himself. She stood up, straightening her apron. You can't change what happened, Mr. Ramsey, but you can stop pretending it didn't. He watched her walk toward the kitchen, then stop and turn back. My mom used to keep a picture of the factory crew. You in the middle, shaking hands with everyone. She framed it, said you were going to be the man who turned things around. After she died, I found that picture under her pillow. She never stopped believing in you. Elliot's chest tightened. She shouldn't have. No, Tasha said softly, but she did. There was a long pause. Elliot reached for his wallet, pulled out a business card, and slid it onto the table. If you ever need anything... She cut him off with a small wave of her hand. Don't do that. Don't cheapen it. Money can't fix a broken heart. He let the card fall from his fingers, ashamed of how natural that reflex had been. Tasha looked at him one last time. You think you buried the past, but some things don't stay buried. They wait. She turned and walked back to the counter, leaving him there, sitting in silence. He stared at his reflection in the diner window. A man who'd built his empire on a foundation of forgotten names. Loretta Green, Tasha Green. Names he'd told himself didn't matter at the time. But now, sitting in that old diner, he realized the truth. Sometimes the ghosts we try to bury aren't haunting us. They're waiting for us to finally listen. Elliot sat there, still staring out the window as the rain came down harder. The reflection looking back at him didn't look like the man people saw in magazine covers or in conference halls. He looked older, smaller, human. When Tasha came back out from the kitchen, the diner had started to thin out. Only 2 customers remained, a trucker finishing his pie and an elderly couple splitting a plate of fries. The low murmur of country music played from the jukebox in the corner. Elliot cleared his throat. Tasha, sit down, please. She hesitated, arms crossed. You said your piece already. He motioned to the seat across from him. Please. Something in his tone was different now. Not defensive, not commanding, but almost pleading. She pulled the chair out slowly and sat down. He took a long breath. I didn't come here to hurt you again. I need to tell you something I never told anyone. She leaned back, eyes wary. Go on. I've built everything I have. Every dollar, every company, every headline, by convincing myself that my choices were necessary, that it was all part of the cost of building something great. He paused, his voice cracking slightly. But I've spent the last 10 years trying not to think about the faces behind those costs. I guess I thought if I gave enough to charity, if I funded enough scholarships, it would even out somehow. But it doesn't. Not really. Tasha stayed silent, listening. Her eyes softened, but her face didn't. He continued, I didn't come here to make excuses. I came here because maybe I needed someone to remind me who I was before I became this. Tasha tilted her head. And who was that? A scared kid who thought success would make him worth something, he said. Turns out, all it did was make me hollow. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside grew louder, pattering against the glass like steady applause. Then Tasha said quietly, "You can't rewrite what happened. You can't bring her back." "I know," he replied, "but I can stop pretending she didn't matter." Maybe that's a start. She studied him, her expression unreadable. "You think saying that's going to help me sleep better at night?" He shook his head. "No, but maybe it'll help me start living like a man she'd be proud to have worked for." That caught her off guard. She looked down at the table, running her thumb over a water ring. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "I came to work this morning thinking I'd finally get to hurt you the way you hurt us. Thought it'd feel good to watch you squirm. But now, seeing you like this, I don't feel good at all." Elliot leaned forward, his tone low. "Maybe that's because you're not like me." Tasha looked up sharply. "You didn't destroy someone's life to save your own," he said. "You just told the truth. That's what strong people do." She exhaled, shaking her head. "Strong people still break, Mr. Ramsey." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe breaking's the only honest thing either of us has done today." There was a brief silence. Then Tasha said, "So what are you going to do now? Go back to your jet, your board meetings?" He thought about it. "Maybe not. Maybe I start with Baton Rouge, visit her grave like you said." "You'd really do that?" "Yes," he said. "Not because it fixes anything, but because it's what I should have done a long time ago." Tasha watched him for a while, measuring whether she believed him. Then she nodded slightly. "If you go there, bring flowers." She liked marigolds. He smiled sadly. "I remember. She used to keep them by her desk." "Yeah," Tasha said, looking down. She said they reminded her that even tough things can bloom. A small tear slipped down her cheek, and this time she didn't bother to wipe it away. Elliot's voice softened. "I wish I could tell her that her daughter turned out like her." Tasha blinked fast, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. "She's gone," he said, "but you've got her courage. You didn't have to say anything today. You could have stayed silent, but you didn't. That takes strength." "I can't buy." She swallowed hard, her lips parting slightly. "You don't owe me words, Mr. Ramsey." "I do," he said firmly. "I owe you more than that." The bell above the diner door jingled as a breeze came through. The trucker left, and the room went quiet again. Tasha finally stood up. "You said you wanted to tell the truth. Here's mine." He looked up. "I hated you for years," she said quietly. "Blamed you for everything that went wrong. But standing here now, I see something I didn't expect." "What's that?" "You're not a monster. You're just a man who forgot what being human meant." That hit him deeper than she knew. But for the first time since reading that note, Elliot felt something strange. Not comfort, not forgiveness, but the weight of a second chance pressing against his chest. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle by the time the last customer left. Tasha started wiping down the counter, but her movements were slower now, thoughtful. Elliot remained seated in the booth, his untouched coffee growing cold. He watched her work, every motion deliberate, and wondered how many people he'd walked past over the years without really seeing them. The janitors in his offices, the security guards who nodded at him every morning, the assistants who kept his empire running while he barked orders from a distance, all invisible, all forgotten. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You got a son, right?" Tasha froze, still holding the damp cloth in her hand. "Yeah, Jameer, he's 16. Good kid?" She smiled faintly. "Too smart for his own good. Thinks he's grown." Elliot's tone softened. "He knows about all this?" "Some," she said. "Not everything. Just that my mama worked herself to death for a man who didn't care. I didn't tell him your name, though. Didn't want him growing up angry at a ghost." He nodded slowly. "That's good of you." She smirked. "No. That's me protecting him from a world that eats kids like him alive. Anger's a fire that spreads if you don't control it." Elliot looked down, tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "I wish someone had told me that when I was his age." Tasha glanced up at him. "What made you like this, huh? All that money, all that power. What did it cost you?" He hesitated, then quietly, "Everything that mattered." The words came out small, like he was hearing them for the first time. My mom worked 3 jobs, he said. I watched her cry over bills, over men who left, over everything. I swore I'd never be poor again. That became my religion. I thought if I could make it to the top, I'd be free. But the higher I climbed, the less I felt. I traded people for profit. And one day, I woke up and didn't recognize the man in the mirror. Tasha leaned on the counter, watching him carefully. Maybe today's your mirror then. He looked up, meeting her eyes. You can't change what you did, she said, but you can change what kind of man walks out of this diner. He let those words hang in the air for a moment, then he nodded. You're right. She crossed her arms, skeptical. And what does that mean? It means I'm going back, he said, to Baton Rouge. To the old plant, to every place where my choices cost someone their life. I don't care if it makes me look weak. People deserve more than an apology hidden behind a foundation check. She raised an eyebrow. You think that's going to make it right? No, he said, but maybe it'll make it honest. Her eyes softened a little, and for the first time that night, she didn't sound like she was carrying a blade behind her words. Honest is a good start, she said quietly, but don't go there to make peace with yourself. Go there to tell the truth about her, I will. Good. Elliot stood up, sliding his hands into his coat pockets. The faint sound of the rain on the roof echoed like a metronome in the silence. He looked around the diner one last time. You ever think about leaving this place? She smiled, shaking her head. Every day. But my mama's buried here and my son's in school. Some roots you just don't pull up. He nodded. She'd be proud of you. Tasha's lips trembled just slightly. Yeah, she whispered. I hope so. He took a step toward the door, then paused. You said your son's 16? Yeah. Elliot hesitated, pulling a card from his pocket. Not one of his corporate ones, but a small, handwritten note. He scribbled a number on it and placed it on the counter. That's my personal line. Not business. If Jameer ever needs help getting into college, real help, not charity, call me. I'll take care of it. Quietly, Tasha stared at the card. You trying to buy forgiveness? He shook his head. No, just trying to give a kid a chance I never gave his grandmother. She studied him for a long moment before finally taking the card. I'll think about it. That's all I can ask, he said softly. He turned to leave, pushing the door open, the bell jingling softly. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled fresh, clean in a way he hadn't noticed in years. He walked toward his car, feeling something strange and heavy settle inside him. Not guilt, not shame, but accountability. Inside, Tasha watched him through the window, her reflection overlapping with his silhouette outside. 2 worlds that never should have met again, connected for one final moment. But as he opened his car door, Elliot knew the reckoning wasn't over. It was only waiting for him in Baton Rouge, where silence had its own kind of memory. 2 weeks later, the morning sun rose over Baton Rouge, cutting through a gray sky that hadn't seen light in days. Elliot Ramsey stood in front of a small cemetery behind St. Mary's Church, the one Tasha had mentioned. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and old flowers. In his hands, he held a bouquet of marigolds. He'd come alone. No driver, no security, no suit. Just jeans, a black coat, and a heart that hadn't felt this heavy in years. He walked past rows of faded headstones until he found her name carved into the stone, Loretta Green, 1958 to 2002. Beneath it were the words, "She gave more than she had." Elliot crouched down, brushing away a few fallen leaves. The marigolds trembled in his grip as he placed them gently beside her grave. For a long moment, he just stared at the ground. No words, no rehearsed speech. "Loretta," he said quietly, his voice shaking a little. "You were right about everything." He paused, swallowing hard. "You believed in people. You believed in me. I didn't deserve that faith. I told myself what I did was business, but it wasn't. It was fear, and greed, and pride." His throat tightened. "I made choices that hurt people like you. People who worked hard and trusted me to do right by them. I didn't call you back because I didn't want to hear the truth. I didn't come to your funeral because I didn't want to see what I'd done. He ran a hand over his face, his breath unsteady. I can't change it, but I'm here now, and I'll make sure they remember your name. Not as a number on a payroll, but as the woman who taught me what a life's worth really is. The wind rustled through the trees. He stayed there a while, long enough for his knees to ache and the silence to feel almost peaceful. When he finally stood, something inside him had shifted. The noise in his head, the endless calculations, the meetings, the ambition, had gone quiet. For once, he wasn't thinking about deals or stock prices. He was thinking about people. As he turned to leave, a soft voice behind him said, "Didn't think you'd actually come." Elliot turned, and there was Tasha, holding a small bundle of marigolds of her own. He blinked in surprise. "How'd you—" "I called the church," she said simply. "Figured if you really meant what you said, this is where you'd be." He nodded, unable to hide the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess I'm predictable after all." Tasha walked closer, kneeling beside her mother's grave. She arranged her flowers neatly next to his. "She'd be happy you came," she said softly. "She believed in forgiveness." Elliot's gaze lingered on the headstone. "I'm not sure I deserve it." "Forgiveness isn't about deserve," Tasha said. "It's about letting go before the hate eats you alive." He looked at her. "You think you can do that? Let go?" Tasha took a long breath, her eyes glistening. "I don't know. But seeing you here, seeing you remember her, maybe it's a start." They stood there in silence for a while, just two people connected by pain, loss, and something that almost resembled understanding. Finally, Tasha said, "You know, my son Jameer got accepted into a pre-college summer program. Said he wants to study computer engineering." Elliot's eyebrows lifted. "That's impressive." "Yeah," she said with a small smile. "He's got a mind for it. Kind of reminds me of you, except, with a conscience." Elliot chuckled softly. "Then he's already a better man than I was at his age." She looked at him. "Maybe you still can be." He met her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he believed it. They stood quietly, the wind carrying the faint hum of cars from the highway. The marigolds leaned slightly in the breeze, their bright orange petals catching the light. Elliot took one last look at Loretta's name, then turned to Tasha. "Thank you for not letting me stay comfortable in my silence." Tasha nodded. "Sometimes silence costs more than speaking up." He smiled faintly. "I think I'm finally learning that." She extended her hand, not in friendship yet, but in acknowledgement. A truce. He took it. Her grip was firm, grounded, real. As they walked back toward the parking lot, Elliot felt the first hint of peace settle in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but the sense that maybe redemption wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you worked toward, one honest act at a time. Tasha paused at her car and looked at him. "So what now?" He looked toward the road ahead. "Now, I start telling the truth. About her. About me. About what success really costs." She nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through. "Good. Just make sure you keep your word this time." He gave a small, respectful nod. "I will." They parted ways, two people forever connected by a single note, 6 words, and a truth too long ignored. As Elliot drove away, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden hue over the cemetery. In the rearview mirror, he could still see the marigolds glowing bright against the stone. And for the first time in decades, Elliot Ramsey felt human again. Because sometimes it only takes one voice, one act of courage, to remind a man that silence has a cost, and accountability is the only path to peace. What we bury doesn't disappear. It waits. For truth, for courage, for us to finally listen. No matter how far you rise, remember the people who helped you climb, and the lives your choices touched. Because power means nothing if it silences compassion. If this story moved you, take a moment today to reach out to someone you may have wronged, or someone who once believed in you. Don't wait for time to teach you the cost of silence. Speak, apologize, heal. That's where real change begins.